Greetings, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the first Tech Talk hosted by the Surveillance and Response Working Group of APMEN. The SRWG is one of 3 working groups in the Asia-Pacific Malaria Elimination Network, a collegial forum of national malaria programs from 21 countries and 50 partner institutions sharing technical malaria expertise. The SRWG was originally established in 2014 to be a peer-led technical working group for APMEN country partners and partner institutions. The creation of this working group aligns with the priorities set out in the Global Technical Strategy for Malaria, which seeks to transform malaria surveillance into a key intervention as one of the main pillars, and has since sought to develop and coordinate surveillance and response activities that support malaria elimination in APMEN countries and accelerate progress towards the Asia-Pacific regional elimination goal of 2030. For 2021 to 22, the Mahidol Oxford Tropical Medicine Research Unit in Bangkok is taken over as host institution for the SRWG, which I co-chair alongside Dr Huynh Hong, Director General of the CDC of the Ministry of Health in Lao PDR. Today, the SRWG will start off with a flagship APMEN event through hosting a tech talk on the topic of surveillance for antimalarial drug resistance. Joining us for the talk today are leading experts: Prof Arjen Dondorp, Deputy Director of MORU and Chair of the Regional Steering Committee for the Regional Artemisinin Resistance Initiative in the GMS, Prof Olivo Miotto from the Centre for Genomics and Global Health at the Wellcome Sanger Institute, and also MORU, who will share their expertise and knowledge about antimalarial drug resistance and application of genomic surveillance. Accompanying Professor Olivo are Dr Chindavongsa, Deputy Director of the Centre for Malaria, Parasitology and Entomology in Lao PDR, and Dr Huynh Hong Quang, Vice Director and Head of the Tropical Diseases Clinical and Treatment Research Department at the Institute of Malaria, Parasitology and Entomology in Quy Nhon, Vietnam, who will speak about their use of parasite genetic data to support drug policy and decision-making in their respective countries. Before we begin, I would like to inform you of the mechanics of the webinar. Audio and video of attendees will be disabled, but you are encouraged to comment in the chat box and submit questions in the Q&A box, as well as to upvote questions. Following the presentations by our 4 speakers, I will moderate a 15-minute Q&A session, during which the questions with the highest upvote will be selected for discussion with our speakers. Without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Huynh Hong, Chair of the SRWG, to deliver the opening remarks for this tech talk.
Thank you, Professor Richard, for the kind introductions. Distinguished speakers, colleagues, and friends, it gives me a great pleasure to be with you today and to welcome you to the first among many activities that the Surveillance and Response Working Group is seeking to share with our members. The Tech Talk series is a unified platform through which all the 3 working groups with APMEN, including the vector control and VIVEX working groups, highlight key technical areas of interest and facilitate knowledge exchange around research and implementation. And most importantly, bring in lessons learned from the field. Knowledge sharing is a key theme in APMEN's work, and it is without doubt that through activities such as these webinars, we are able to foster dialogues with our members and support ongoing information exchange, even in time when global health crises have causing major disruptions in our today's operations. For many years, APMEN and the Asian Pacific Leaders Malaria Alliance have continued to work closely with one another to host this network of countries and stakeholders that are strongly committed to eliminating malaria in the Asia Pacific by 2030s. Great progress has been made by all 21 countries, but with the global COVID-19 pandemic, the strength of our programs have been tested, and we share a common challenge to maintain the hard-fought progress that were achieved in pre-pandemic times. Activities such as these webinars and the SRWG's training needs assessments are complementary efforts aiming to maintain and improve country programs' capacities to continue to effectively work towards their respective elimination goals. Through the SRWG and under the guidance of APMEN leadership, we seek to support the maintenance of ongoing quality and robust surveillance activities to ensure that our past eliminate efforts are sustained in the face of new challenge. The COVID-19 pandemic has elicited as well as pre-existing challenges within our public health landscapes. Colleagues and friends, the public health crisis that began in 2019 stressed the importance of adapting to change to prevent lapsing of the advance we have made. The presence of artemisinin-resistant Plasmodium falciparum in parts of these regions continue to challenge elimination goals for many of our partners. And with recent findings from Uganda, whereby resistant strains were found to cause observable drops in efficacy of artemisinin combination therapies. It is important to note that this ongoing threat has now expanded beyond the GMS and into the most precarious malaria endemic regions in the world. More so than ever before, resistant surveillance is essential for countries to rapidly identify, monitor, and respond to this threat. This TechTalk comes at an opportune time. I welcome fellow attendees and colleagues from across the regions with the hope of encouraging stronger linkage and cross-regional collaboration and exchange to tackle this challenge. This webinar seeks to increase your awareness and how surveillance of antimalarial drug resistance may be executed. With the additional learning outcome of real-world applications, particularly on how genetic surveillance may serve as a useful tool for programs to consider and support strategic decision-making at the country level. Colleagues and friends, this next speaker is a veteran of this area with a research portfolio scanning from pathophysiology and treatment of severe malaria to antimalarial drug resistance. I would like to invite Dr. Arjen Dondorp, Deputy Director of the Mahidol Tropical Medicine Research Unit and Chair of the Regional Artemisinin Resistance Initiative Regional Steering Committee, to speak about the surveillance for antimalarial drug resistance. I thank you, our speakers, colleagues, and friends for your participations and wish you all a fruitful webinar session. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Naksai, for this very nice introduction. I will start sharing my screen. So I will kick off this, these 4 talks with a very general overview on monitoring antimalarial drug resistance surveillance. I'll stress a bit why it is important and the different methods we have to do this surveillance for antimalarial drug resistance. So as a start, as you probably all know, we are very dependent on the artemisinin-based combination therapies. They are the first-line treatment for falciparum malaria throughout the malaria endemic world. And we have these 6 ACTs that are currently recommended by the WHO. And they've really contributed a lot to bringing down the global burden of falciparum malaria. So when resistance emerges against the artemisinin component or to partner drugs, of course, we have to be very worried. And it's not that easy to monitor resistance for these drugs because it are combinations. So sometimes it's difficult to tell whether it's the artemisinin component or the partner drug component. So I'll start with that. So the artemisinins are great drugs and the fastest killing drugs that we have available at the moment. And that is because they already attack the ring stage of the parasite. So you see in the left panel, the erythrocytic state of the parasite grow from a ring stage to a trophozoite to a schizont. Well, the artemisinin drugs are at the moment the only ones who already attack these ring stage forms of the parasites, and those are the ones that circulate. So if you kill those, you see a very rapid decline in the peripheral blood parasitemia, and that you see on the right hand graph, that normally you see a 10 to the 4th every 8-hour cycle of the parasite decline in parasitemia. So we were worried when now 12, 13 years ago in Western Cambodia, we saw that the artemisinins were losing this potency. And you see that in the upper 2 lines of the graph, and now killed only around 100 times folds the parasites in this 48 hours. Initially, there was a lot of discussion how to name this slow clearance phenotype of artemisinin-resistant parasites, and in the end, it was chosen to just call this resistance. It's not full resistance. You can still kill parasites, but as with many other drugs where you see resistance, it's not full resistance. You can still use them to kill parasites. So why should we worry about this slow clearance of the parasites? Because the artemisinin combination therapies can still be quite effective despite artemisinin resistance. Well, there are several reasons. It does contribute to reduced efficacy of the artemisinin-based combination therapies. But your partner drug can still do its job. So if you have full sensitivity to the partner drug, the ACT can still be effective. But if there's only a little bit resistance also towards the partner drug, you see a decline in the ACT efficacy. And we have many examples from that, especially from the Greater Mekong Subregion, that if you see a little bit resistance to the partner drug, you see efficacy. This is a slide from the Thai-Myanmar border from SMRU, where you see a stepwise decrease in efficacy depending whether you have only resistance to the mefloquine component, to the artemisinin component, which is the red line. You already see a 20% decrease in efficacy. But if you have resistance to both components, then you see this massive decline in efficacy to only around 60%, as was observed on the Myanmar-Thai border. By the way, we can do these sort of analysis because we have these molecular markers where I will come back to later on. So artemisinin resistance does decrease the efficacy of the ACTs. We have a recent study in Cambodia where we also see that with artemether-lumefantrine, that AL efficacy goes down from around 97% to 90%. But it's also important for the treatment of severe malaria. Luckily, we see only very little severe malaria in the GMS nowadays because falciparum malaria has gone down so dramatically. But as you all know, parenteral artesunate is the first-line treatment for severe malaria. So when it has lost its potency, and its potency goes back to a similar potency as like quinine, is it still the best drug to treat severe malaria? Well, there are no real big series about that and no randomized trials to compare that with quinine. But some case reports, for instance, again from the Myanmar-Thai border, patients presenting with severe malaria not responding well to artesunate therapy, and a few of these patients died or had to have rescue treatment with intravenous quinine. That said, a recent report from Vietnam, which included severe malaria cases from, for instance, Binh Phuc province, did not show an increase in severe malaria mortality in that observational study. So it reduces the efficacy, but maybe even more importantly, it facilitates the emergence of resistance of the partner drug in the artemisinin combination therapies. And that's best illustrated again with artesunate mefloquine. So that was introduced in Thailand in the 90s already. At the moment when there was already mefloquine resistance, but the combination was highly efficacious for years and years and years. And then when artemisinin resistance appeared, again in these here with the marker we have, the molecular marker for artemisinin resistance, when that's increased, then quickly mefloquine resistance reappeared. And then you saw a massive decline in the efficacy of artesunate mefloquine, and a switch was made to DHA piperacin for that reason. And once you have ACT failure, then the spread of the resistant parasites goes very quickly if you keep using that particular ACT. And that's because you have recrudescent infections that can then reinfect other people. But also because recrudescent infection always have more sexual stages of parasites and therefore can transmit more easily. That's not a phenomenon only with ACTs, but also with other drugs that has been shown. So that amplifies this circle that once you have ACT failure, you will have increased transmission, a larger reservoir of resistant parasites, which will increase drug pressure because you have more cases to treat and you have this amplifying circle. And that is what we saw happening in Cambodia in 2013 till 2016-17. We saw a rapid spread of artemisinin and piperacin resistance with these resulting in these very high treatment failures with DHA piperacin, not only in Cambodia, but also in northeastern Thailand, southern Laos and southern Vietnam, not in Laos using AL, southern Vietnam, as you can see in this graph here. And that's the reason why Cambodia has changed back to artesunate mefloquine, and Vietnam in those provinces has changed to artesunate pyronaridine. And then the last reasons why we should be worried about artemisinin resistance, that's artemisinin resistance on its own probably increases the transmissibility of the infection. And because of time, I won't go into that now. So all reasons that we should be worried about artemisinin resistance: it decreases the efficacy of the ACTs, and maybe important also for the treatment of severe malaria. It facilitates partner drug resistance, and it increases transmissibility of the infection. So how to do the surveillance of artemisinin resistance as a start? Well, we have the clinical studies, we have the laboratory assays, and we have molecular markers. So to start with the clinical studies, so artemisinin resistance was initially described as this slow clearance phenotype. And indeed, it's still the best measure of artemisinin resistance because in the ACTs, the artemisinins are responsible for this rapid initial decline of parasitemia. The partner drug contributes a little bit, but not that much. And the decline in parasitemia is always log linear. So if you have here log parasitemia, it's a straight line going down, and you can calculate a half-life out of this. And in sensitive parasites in low transmission areas with little immunity, it's around 3.5 hours. That's a parasite half-life. In resistant populations, it's around 6.5 hours, the half-life. Luckily, this has not further increased over time. We were afraid of that artemisinin resistance would become worse, so in a single parasite strain, and that this parasite clearance half-life would increase to 10 hours or so, but that has not happened. This parasite clearance half-life is quite independent of the initial parasitemia, but it is quite dependent on the immunity of the patients. For instance, in Africa, high transmission area, so kids become pre-immune against falciparum malaria. There, the parasite clearance half-life is much quicker, and in artemisinin resistant parasites, the parasite half-life is around 4 or 5 hours. So you have to take that into account. When we looked in Southeast Asia, the immunity, when we look at antibodies, can shorten the parasite clearance half-life by 1 to 2 hours. The cutoff we use for the GMS is 5 hours. So we need to define a different one for Africa. But even that 5 hours is not an absolute number, because if you have a few parasites with a parasite half-life just above 5 hours, it can just be the tail end of this normal distribution of parasite clearance half-lives. So it can just be part of that distribution, not denoting artemisinin resistance. So that definition of the cutoff of the parasite half-life for artemisinin resistance depends on how big the population is of sensitive versus resistant parasite. But let's take 5 hours as the cutoff. Then it's quite labor intensive to get to that parasite half-life. You have to do a slide, say, every 6 hours until parasite clearance to be able to make this nice curve, which under routine circumstances is not very well feasible. So a surrogate marker is this 3-day positivity rate of patients with a falciparum malaria treated with an ACT. And that's quite a good screening measure, but as you can see from this graph, it will depend quite a bit on the initial parasitemia. If you start with a very low parasitemia, even with slow clearance, it will already be cleared at 72 hours. So it's sensitive to that and a few other factors. In addition, because of this distribution of the parasite half-lives, you never get 100% day 3 positivity with the current level of artemisinin resistance. So a reduction to the parasite clearance half-life to 6.5 hours, or a slowing of the parasite clearance half-life. And we have modeled that, and you can see that in this graph, 2 examples of a small study with 30 people or a big study with 500 patients, even if you have 100% artemisinin resistant parasites defined by this slow clearance, by this slope of 6.5 hours, your day 3 positivity rate only is like 50%. So if you see 50% day 3, you know there is, there can be 100% artemisinin resistance. It's not 50% artemisinin resistance. So that is important when you use the day 3 positivity rate as your indicator for artemisinin resistance. The warning sign the WHO uses is more than 10% day 3 positivity. Then we move to the laboratory methods to look at artemisinin resistance. In the beginning, we noticed that if you use the conventional in vitro sensitivity tests, so Scheisel maturation, isotopic methods, or HIP2 based methods, those methods are not very sensitive in the laboratory to pick up artemisinin resistance. And you see here 2 examples. This is the early study from Western Cambodia in 2009, and around the same time from Rick Fairhurst's group, also in Cambodia. So at a population level, you still see a slight increase in the so-called IC50, denoting reduced sensitivity of the parasite. But for individual patients, it's not sensitive at all. And that has to do with the fact that artemisinin resistance is only or mainly in these ring stage form of the parasite. The more mature forms, the trophosorites and the Scheisels, are still sensitive. And the Pasteur Institute has then developed this ring stage assay specifically to pick up artemisinin resistance, where they synchronize the parasites to early ring stages, here 0 to 3 hours, then expose the parasites 6 hours to dihydroartemisinin, 700 nanomolar, and then you see a very clear difference between artemisinin resistant parasites and artemisinin sensitive parasites. And that difference disappears in the more mature forms, because those are still sensitive. So this RSA test is now becoming the reference standard for the laboratory testing of artemisinin resistance, but technically it's quite difficult to do in the laboratory. So we were very happy when a molecular marker for artemisinin resistance was discovered, again by the Pasteur Institute, and those are those famous Kelch mutation. So the gene for the Kelch protein on chromosome 13, the propeller region of that, many possible mutations there. The parasite somehow allows only one mutation or one SNP in that gene, otherwise apparently the parasite is no longer viable. And most of those mutations identified result in a slower clearance of the parasitemia in an infected person. The WHO groups those Kelch mutations, whether they are really validated for artemisinin resistance. That means that if you make transgenic parasites in the laboratory and sort of put in that Kelch mutation, then you see with the RSA in vitro test that the parasite becomes resistant. Then there are associated SNPs where there is a clear correlation with slower clearance. And then there are a few of those SNPs or point mutation in the Kelch gene that do not cause artemisinin resistance. And here you see 2 of those, the 578 especially is one that is seen quite a bit in Africa. So very good marker, and I'm sure Olivo will tell more about it in his talk. That is not only a very good tool to pick up artemisinin resistance, but also look at the epidemiology of artemisinin resistance, how it spreads. And this is what we saw happening in Cambodia, that a single lineage of Plasmodium falciparum carrying that 580Y mutation, and then also picked up resistance to piperoquine, then quickly spread through Cambodia. And that was a single lineage, because when you look at the genes around the Kelch mutation, they were also all the same. So we know it's the same lineage. And we know it's a different lineage that spreads in the western Greater Mekong Subregion here in Myanmar. And another one that spread in Myanmar is the 446 Kelch mutation. Surveillance, this molecular surveillance is done by quite a few groups, and the NMCPs are heavily involved in that. This is the WARN website that summarizes all those studies that are published and put them in these very nice maps that you can look up on free, publicly accessible on the internet. And you can choose which region you want to look at, which time period, and if you only want to look at larger studies or at all studies. So molecular surveillance is happening and is being mapped. What about Africa? Yeah, also in Africa, a lot of studies on the molecular marker have been performed, and until recently, Kelch mutation were identified in Africa, but only at these low frequencies, and sort of the background frequencies that you could expect given how well preserved that Kelch gene is. I'll not further explain that graph here on the left. Until recently, so you might have heard from the recent reports from both Rwanda and Ethiopia, where now artemisinin resistance has clearly established. It's not just that background mutation rate without signatures of selection, but really there is expansion of lineages carrying this mutation. In Rwanda, it's the 561H mutation. Now around 20% of circulating parasites there in Rwanda, which is very worrying because more than 90% of falciparum malaria is in Africa. It's not only in Rwanda. Very recently, I think just last week, this was published in the New England Journal. Also in northern Uganda, there is, like in Rwanda, a independently emerged strains of artemisinin resistance, and the predominant one in Uganda is this 575V mutation. Again, a single haplotype that is expanding there, which also shows a slower clearance phenotype in the patients, but because of immunity, it's still quite quick. It's between 4 and 5 hours, if I remember correctly. So what about the partner drugs? It's there, for some of the partner drugs, we have very good molecular markers, and I've listed them here. So for chloroquine, mefloquine, sulfadoxine pyrimethamine, atovaquone, and paraquine, we have very good molecular markers, but not for all of them, unfortunately. So for lumefantrine, amodiaquine, and pyronaridine, at the moment, we do not have good molecular markers. Again, I think it's important to distinguish between artemisinin resistance and partner drug resistance. Personally, I don't like the word ACT resistance, because then you don't know which part of the ACT the resistance is against. So I think it's better to talk about ACT efficacy and resistance towards the individual components. Then one of my last slides, in the end, it is about efficacy of the ACTs. And here the WHO TES studies are instrumental. And they've done this for years and years and years in all their sentinel sites all over the malaria endemic world. They publish that once in a while in these great overview reports. There was one in 2019 being published. Very important, but it's getting more difficult in the Greater Mekong Subregion because falciparum malaria has gone down so massively that it's difficult to find sufficient number of patients to do these TES studies. And therefore the WHO has now, together with the NMCVBs, developed these so-called IDES studies, integrated drug efficacy surveillance, which is sort of a light form of the test studies that can just be integrated in the routine care at the community level for treatment of patients with falciparum malaria. And then this is also from the WHO. It hasn't changed over the last years because based on these efficacy studies, recommendations are made whether or not to change your first-line treatments. And there is this WHO threshold. If you see a reduction in efficacy below 90% at 42 days or longer for some of the partner drugs, the WHO advises to change the first-line treatments. So that was the last slide. So in summary, antimalarial drug-resistant monitoring is very important to preempt problems that you might highly likely see in the future in drug efficacy, especially that with artemisinin resistance, but also with the resistance to the partner drug. And I discussed briefly the different methods we have at hand. So the clinical drug sensitivity studies, the in vitro and ex vivo sensitivity testing. By the way, the ex vivo sensitivity testing is when you do your testing close to the patients with fresh parasites. And luckily, we have a larger and larger arsenal of molecular markers to monitor antimalarial drug resistance. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for the talk, Professor Dondorp. To the attendees, please could we ask you to put any questions in the Q&A box. And the next speaker is Professor Olivo Miotto.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard, and thanks, Arjen, for that great introduction. And it prepares the grounds very well for me to show how we do some of the activities that you described in practice. I'll just share my presentation. Okay, so Arjen described different ways in which we can conduct surveillance of drug resistance, and you know, this clinical, in vitro, and genetic surveillance. And I think he outlined very well the complexities of conducting this this type of surveillance, because clinical studies require a lot of resources, take a rather long time, and they are difficult to control, essentially. In vitro studies can help under certain circumstances, but it's quite hard to do sort of experimental cultures of the Plasmodium parasites. Genetic surveillance is somewhat different in that we can collect blood samples and test them in the lab and look for genetic changes in the population of the parasites, and that in many ways can give us earlier signals of the emergence of resistance. So what I'd like to tell you a bit about is this project that I've that I've been leading in this region for the last 5 years or so, GenRe-Mekong. And the project is essentially tries to fulfill certain objectives. First of all, to make it simple for countries to conduct genetic surveillance using the existing infrastructure. So, in other words, you know, we don't have complex protocols to be put in place and so on. We just collect dry blood spots, which are very simple to collect. We send out kits that allow clinics, even in the most basic settings, to collect samples from every single case they encounter. And then these are aggregated periodically, and we process them and create a genetic profile of the parasites that infected the patients. And we put together this data and we create reports that then we send back to the national malaria control programs in the countries. And because the national malaria control programs are in charge of the coordination of the sample collection, then in a sense, we are offering just technical support, and it is the country that is actually deciding on strategy and benefiting from the results. And we've actually been conducting this with several control programs in the countries in the Greater Mekong Subregion. And this is an overview of the sites that we've been using. And you can see over here that, and so far we've actually processed about 14,000 samples of falciparum, and we've actually got also 4,000 vivax samples. Our tests for falciparum are somewhat more advanced, and we've worked not only with control programs but also with large-scale research projects that are operating in this area. So, as I said, the collection methods are very simple, and we provide a little kit with all the necessities. We don't require really any detailed information. We just want to know the date and the location where the sample was collected. So this is extremely simple for the staff at the health facilities to collect, and allows us to extend to several thousand of samples a year. We actually do give a lot of support to the countries in starting off, and these two ladies are members of my team who look after the coordination of these activities. We run training programs for the field staff. We fund staff in the countries to aggregate the samples and send them to us and provide the kits and so on. And most importantly, we actually work with technical experts, scientific experts in the country to discuss the results and communicate them to the control program. So this is actually an overview of how the system works. In the middle there, you can see where we have laboratories, and we have laboratories in the UK, which is the core laboratory, but we're also setting up laboratories within countries and in the region. And these laboratories work together with the NMCPs and the local scientific partners, and they're supported by informatics, by computing resources back at the Wellcome Sanger Institute, such that we turn around data sets quite rapidly by analyzing the data both in country or in the UK, and then delivering the data back to the countries. So in Vietnam, I believe Dr. Nguyen is on this call. In Vietnam, we've set up a laboratory for processing the samples from Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, and this is now operational. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has caused a shutdown over there, but that's just a temporary glitch. So it's become a reality that actually these technologies can be implemented in country and in the region. And we are supporting, we're putting together training programs and communication programs in order to deliver this information back to the public health authorities, because of course that they're our primary target, our primary recipient. One really important thing here, and Aria is our technical coordinator who's working with the countries to disseminate knowledge. One important aspect of all this is that we found the control programs very willing to share information amongst themselves. And this actually has made a big impact also. And I think I'll show you why in a second. Our platform is able to genotype a lot of the mutations, a lot of the drug resistance mutations, which Arjen mentioned earlier on. And as he rightly said, we do have markers of resistance for several drugs of interest. There are some where markers that have been found are not as informative as others. In addition to that, we also profile each parasite with what we call a genetic barcode, which we use in order to look at similarity between different strains, and in order to reconstruct where strains came from and how they are spreading. So we've done quite a lot of research in the literature to try to predict whether parasites are resistant to the different drugs, and we use that in order to produce maps of prevalence of resistance in different countries. So this is a map of artemisinin, which is in our recent publication from this project. And the interesting thing here is that we are able to compare the distribution of resistance in different countries. And you can see here the value of the different control programs sharing information, where the presence of resistance is not an isolated piece of data in your own country, but it's viewed in a context of a whole region of Cambodia, northeastern Thailand, southern Laos, and southern and central Vietnam, being essentially affected by the spread of very aggressive strains of resistant parasites. And interesting, what we found is that the spread of resistance is less contained than the spread of piperacin, which again is really only piperacin resistance, which is really only limited to those countries that use DHA piperacin combination, well, except for a little spillage into Laos there. But you can see that we are actually able to monitor the spread of resistance. And so we focused initially on activities that have to do with drug resistance. But what we are able to do now also is to look at outbreaks, because one of the effects of getting near elimination is that outbreaks can actually create new forms of drug resistance. So it's very important to now look at where there are sudden increases in the number of cases and try to understand whether they are driven by drug resistant strains or not. And actually, we're developing methods for doing this. I'm not going to explain what this is, but what we are doing here is we are looking for clusters of resistant parasites that are responsible for an outbreak. And this actually, we're able to use the genetic barcodes in order to map how these strains are connected between sites, and really how they're localized and where they come from. And actually, when you start putting this information across different countries and across different years, you can reconstruct a history of the spread of these strains, and you can identify how how drug resistance is moving through the region, and hopefully all this translates into policy decisions by the control programs based on this information. So I would like to thank all the people who contributed to our project, and I won't take any more of your time. I would like Dr. Keo from Laos and Dr. Quang from Vietnam, who've been working with us, and they've been our precious partners. I would love them to tell you their perspective on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Miotto. So indeed, our next speaker is Dr. Huynh Hong Quang from Simply in Laos. Dr. Keo, you're on mute. Dr. Keo, you're on mute at the moment.
Microphone unmute. Dr. Keo, your microphone.
Oh, sorry. Let's take off, Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Keobouphaphone Chindavongsa from Malaria Control Program, Lao PDR. Today, I will present our experience for ACT efficacy monitoring. Okay, next slide, please. This is our line. We have the 6 outline. The first National Strategy Plan 2021-2025, and second for the malaria trend, and the third for sanction and sign for the ACT efficacy monitoring, and the therapy efficacy study, and 5 molecular marker result, and the last conclusion. Yeah, next slide, please. This is National Strategy Plan in 2021 and 2025. Our goal to eliminate Plasmodium falciparum malaria in 3 countries, and eliminate on species for malaria in the 13 North provinces. We have the strategy of our objective. The first objective, case management. The case management is the first, maintain universal access to quality malaria diagnosis, and second of case management, increase testing to the risk national annual blood examination rate target the provide, and the third of case management, effective treatment to 100% of case, and the last therapy efficacy study for the prevention and communication, and for the surveillance to ensure the effective nationwide and integrate surveillance system. And we have the supporting the pilot. We have the 2 pilot. The first pilot, operational research, and the second pilot, program manager. Okay, next slide, please. This slide to show the malaria trend in 2017 to 2020. You can see the malaria case from 2017 decreased to 2020, but the malaria case in the southern part of Laos still in the 2020. The case, there is a hotspot that area. Yes, next slide, please. This slide want to show the sentinel sign. In 2014 to 2020, the approach, we have the TS and IDS. We have the partner from WHO, from Institute Pasteur Bilal. We have the MORU, and you can see the southern part of second red color. This is a 5 provinces in that area. Yes, next slide, please. Our TS, the past and present, we have experience for the 4 antimalarial drug. The first, we conduct the artemisinin plus lumefantrine, and second, dihydroartemisinin plus piperacin, and the third, artemisinin plus mefloquine, and the last, artemisinin plus pyronolidine. Yes, next slide, please. After we implementation according to the WHO guidelines, like methods for surveillance of antimalarial drug resistance, we have the criteria to enroll the patient. We conduct the blood sample slide and DBS. We follow up the patient 28 days or 42 days. And you can see in 2014 to 2015, we have the 3 sites. The first, Champasak, we conduct the A number case enrolled 29 and curate 93. And we found that K13 mutation 87% and have the 2 domain, no mefloquine and piperacin resistance. And second side, Sekong province conduct AL also. The number case enrolled 50 and then curate less than 90%. We found K13 52 and only C5X0Y, no piperacin and piperacin resistance. And the third side, Atapu province conduct AL also. The number case enrolled 17, the curate 100%, and we found K13 29 and 3 domain in that area, and no mefloquine and piperacin resistance. In 2016 to 17, we have the 2 sites. First site, Salawan, the number of enrolled 30, and the curate less than 90%, and we found K13 50 and have the domain, 2 domain, no mefloquine and piperacin resistance. Second site, Champasak province, we conduct DHA piperacin, the number of enrolled 43 and curate less than 60%. The K13 mutation have 83 and have the 2 domain. Also, mefloquine and piperacin resistance in this area, like ACT failure and partner drug resistance. And in 2018 to 2019, we conduct the two sites. The first site, we conduct the ASNQ pyramid. Number of enrolled 79, the curate 100%, and we found K13 only 13.8, only 1 domain, C5X0Y, no mefloquine and piperacin resistance. And second side, Champasak, conduct ASMQ, number of enrolled 12, the curate 100%, and we found K13 75, have the 2 domains, and the first domain C5X0Y and second domain C447. This is a new domain. And then mefloquine no resistance, but piperacin resistance in the Champasak also. In 2019 to 2017, we have the 3 sites. The first site, Savanakhet, we conduct AL. The number of enrolled for the fancy 85, the curate 96.3, and we found K13 mutation only 1.17, only 1 domain. and have mefloquine resistance in the Savannah Cat. Second side, Champasak, conduct AL. Number case very low, only four, and then curate 100%, and K13 mutation 100%, and have mefloquine resistance 75%, piperacin resistance 50%, and
We have another minute.
the third side one, we conduct AL, the number of alone 71, the curate 100%, and we found K13 14.2, only one domain C5X0Y, and have the mefloquine resistance and piperacin resistance. Yes, next slide, please. Yeah, this slide to show the map to explain more, like not only ACPR, we look at the day 3 positive, like parasite clearance time, and related to ACPR and related to the K13. Each province I show like the data from last table. Yes, next slide, please. This slide to show 2019 to 2020 for the K13. You can see that we have the three sides. The first side, Champasak 100% have the K13, and second side, Salawan, only 3 cases have the K13 mutation, and the last side, Savannah Cat, only 1 case got K13 mutation. This is very good for Savannah Cat. Yes. Next slide, please. This slide to show from Institute Pasteur du Lao. This is a partner of SIMPE to conduct monitoring the prevalence of the K13 in southern part of Laos. Implementation in the 5 provinces. You can see the K13 mutation in the 5 provinces, and the total mutation rate 55.5. The mainly of K13 is C5X0Y 87%. Yes, next slide, please. This slide to show the each province have the how many domain, and you can see the Champasak and Atapu very high for the C5X0Y, and plus another domain. Compared to the Savannah Cat very low for the C5X0Y, and have the
sorry to interrupt, but we're running over time a bit.
artemisinin sensitive in Savannah Cat. Yes, next slide, please. Continue to Institute Pasteur du Lao. This is second time conduct the BBS from 5 provinces, and but compared to first time, the mutation rate is decreased. Only 45, mainly C5X0Y also 41.3%. Yes, next slide, please. Each province show the domain. The same Champasak and Atapu, too many domain to illiterate. Yes, next slide, please. This slide Lomluli sound to explain the K13 mutation in Attapeu province in 2019 until 2021. Yes, this slide Dr. Olivo can explain more. Yes, next slide please. And for molecular marker, Champasak have the DHAP pelagin resistant phase 1 and phase 2. And then chloroquine, pyrimethamine, sulfadoxine resistant anyway. Yeah. Uh, 15 to 2016, found K13 mutation day 0 was high in two provinces, Champasak and Attapeu. And result from MORU in 2017 to 2021 have showed the chloroquine, sulfadoxine, pyrimethamine resistant in 5 provinces and DHAP pelagin high resistant in Champasak province, and also found K13 mutation in R5393 in Attapeu province. And fifth conclusion, effort on study of partner drug lumefantrine in collaboration with Institut Pasteur du Lao and Institut Pasteur du Cambodia. And in most of the world, the antimalarial drugs are highly efficacy. And the last conclusion is resistance in Plasmodium falciparum has had the great challenge. This is my presentation. Thank you so much for all results from partner. Thank you so much.
Very much, Dr. Gao. Our next speaker is Dr. Quang from IMPEC.
Yeah, hi everyone. I have Professor Olivo Miotto, Professor Arjen Dondorp, Professor Richard Morrow, and Dr. Keobouphaphone Chindavongsa. Are you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay. My presentation today, I would like to talk with all of you about some highlight of the malaria trend in Vietnam in recent 5 years and some result of the in vivo tech and molecular marker in antimalarial resistance in Vietnam. Firstly, I would like to talk with you about the malaria trend in Vietnam from the year 2011 to the year 2000. Sorry, why? From the year 2011 to the year 2020, you can see the yellow color droplet malaria case droplet sharply. And about the blood falciparum and blood virus malaria case in Vietnam, you can see the proportion between falci and virus 50-50 and sometimes the 60% and 40%. However, in last year and first 6 months of this year, it seems to be the blood virus is higher than a little higher than for falciparum. Most of malaria case focus in the Central Highland, with more than 95% case in Vietnam. As you know already, now in Vietnam, also COVID-19 pandemic affecting on all of the systematic and national healthcare system, and therefore You can see malaria K dropped down sharply. Infection in the year 2019, more than 4,000 K, but in this year, in the first by 30 September of the year, only the more than 300 malaria K confirmed already, and COVID-19 so severe in the southern part of Vietnam. It is the reason why the malaria case dropped down. Maybe you know, due to the social distancing and lockdown and limited moving forest goer, and therefore malaria case dropped down in forest and in the highland of Vietnam. I would like to talk with you about the surveillance in malaria in Vietnam. Surveillance is an important component of the long-term plan to get to malaria elimination. Surveillance data routine being reviewed by the all level of the healthcare system, and every year we have a training on the surveillance and key monitoring and evaluation indicates for malaria elimination roadmap. But this year, maybe you know, from the first quarter and the second quarter of this year, COVID-19 pandemic affected on in whole the country, especially in the central and highland of Vietnam, and therefore it seems to be the interruption on of the activity.
Quang, you're muted.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay now.
Yeah, you can hear, you can see my presentation.
No.
No. Oh, sorry. Wait for me. Ready?
Yes, we can see your presentation.
Okay now.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, sir. And here you can see in the map of the Vietnam some red dot. Here is the malaria endemic area, more focused on in the central highland of Vietnam, where we have a border with Cambodia and we have a border with Lao PDR. And here there's some highlight on the TS result we conduct in the Bình Phước, Đắk Nông, Gia Lai, and Đắk Lắk. You can see in the red color is artemisinin and mefloquine and artemisinin biberacin. You can see in the year 2019 to 2021, we conduct some TS with the artemisinin mefloquine. All of them have a high efficacy, nearly 100%, but they triple positive more than 20%. And in another way, we conduct with the TS for the artemisinin biberacin in Gia Lai and Đắk Lắk. Here the two provinces in the highland of Vietnam. We would like to show you about the treatment failure, especially in the late clinical failure and late parasitology failure about the 34% and 60%. But all of them, artesunate, mefloquine, and artemisinin bibaricin, have a day3 positive more than 20%. And here there's some activity we have set up about the molecular marker supervision under OCRU network and under Professor Olivo Miotto training for us in Central Highland of Vietnam and later in Nimbe. And until now, we have more than 12 provinces conduct about the molecular marker and take a part in the GenRe project. OCRU and Impact Quy Nhơn really have long experience and collaboration conducting research together on malaria resistant and parasite disease. GenRe-Mekong start in Vietnam under genetic recognition of the malaria project in Vietnam under active OCRU network, especially in the Dr Huynh Hong Quang. In collaboration of the OCRU, Impact Quy Nhơn and Nimbe, we have set up nationwide network with the series of training activity look like in the presentation of the Professor Olivo Miotto ready. We have focal point manpower for Impact Quy Nhơn and Professor CDC staff, molecular technique training for Impact Quy Nhơn at the OCRU district communal malaria staff where malaria endemic zone in the sampling, storing, transporting to OCRU for molecular analysis in OCRU and in Sanger. And here the some highlight of the result of the molecular marker genetic analysis between Impact Quy Nhơn and Impact Quy Nhơn, OCRU and MORU and Sanger. Yes, we would like to show you and here the some highlight about the artemisinin resistant in Đắk Lắk, where have a high prevalence of the artemisinin resistant. Not only artemisinin resistant, but also in the piperacin resistant also via plasmapsin 2 and 3 application increasing. In similar, in Yalai, you can see here the outbreak under pink by the strong selected of the KL13 and plasmapsin genetic background. You can see in the red dot also in Yalai and Đắk Lắk. Yalai and Đắk Lắk have a border line, and it seems to be the closely border. The forest goer can move and back every day, and therefore I think the falciparum strain can move and combine together between two provinces. Especially in the GenRe in Vietnam, until now, Dr. Huynh and Dr. Professor Olivo Miotto and I recognize about the parasite still sensitivity with the mefloquine. It is very happy. If in the near future we have a resistance to the artemisinin bibaricin spread out and resistant to the artesunate and pyronidine pyramid, we can give the artesunate mefloquine in the near future. And here there's some highlight look similar to the presentation in the presentation of the Professor Olivo Miotto. Most of molecular occur in the province border with the Cambodia in the red dot. And at the present, it seems to be they know the mefloquine resistant evidence, except in Ninh Thuận province, but low rate about the under 1%. And here we know in vivo test is the gold standard in the artemisinin resistant and antimalarial resistant recognized. However, we have some factor affecting on the in vivo test, for example, sampling, sample size, parasite density, and last follow-up, and protocol violation. And therefore, genetic surveillance is an important tool for malaria elimination roadmap. If we have a combined together in vivo test and genetic surveillance, we have a good result for the national antimalarial policy in Vietnam. We also know about the systematic molecular marker early warning sign in the support to change to antimalarial monitoring because in the last year, Professor Olivo Miotto and Dr Huynh share the data in Phú Yên province. At that time, we haven't known the data of the TS, but we have a good and strong evidence for molecular marker artemisinin resistant and plasmapsin 2 and 3 increasing, and therefore we national malaria control program decide to change dihydroartemisinin bibaracin with the artesunate biramat without result of the in vivo test in the Khánh Hòa and Phú Yên. Here the good idea, and it seems to be the very early for change the policy. Thank you so much for the this result from the GenRe project. Combine to confirm of the drug susceptibility and explain disadvantage in each tool. On the other hand, we have a timely information at the national level in the very important for drug policy maker and data contribution in Greater Mekong Subregion may be more helpful in malaria elimination. We also yield the result in the deciding policy at the national and at the national level. Several resistant molecular marker, for example, PFCRT, C5A0Y, and plasmapsin copy number variation will support for us to confirm resistance mainly in many provinces in the Central Highland where border Cambodia and Lao PDR in the malaria contact decreasing decreasing in Vietnam in recent years. We also integrated genetic data and epidemiology data in the malaria epidemiological stratification for Vietnam in the near future, maybe in the year 2024. We use the data for decision in the phase of a quick change epidemiological landscape, resistant genetic marker tracking research for both falciparum and vivax, especially via international cooperation via GenRe-Mekong. Maybe you know in the previous slide, I mentioned about the development of vivax in Vietnam. It seems to be this year and last year in the proportion so high, and therefore in the near future we need to concern and we need to focus on the not only for falciparum but also for vivax. We need to analyze some marker involving the vivax resistant for foster in the vivax malaria foci elimination in Vietnam in the near future. We're looking forward about the future study. Health system strong stressed by the COVID-19 pandemic, but COVID-19, but some malaria foci still occur in Vietnam, especially in the highland of Vietnam. Many vivax foci are emerging in the central and northern part. Proportion vivax is higher than falciparum in formula somewhere in this year. Several proposed operational research we would like to show you about the pilot detection vivax hypnozoid formed by molecular tool or not for radical Q. The second, tracking molecular marker, for example, plasmapsin 2 and 3, exo E45 G, etc. And wide open for molecular marker where new hotspot of malaria and how to maintain at the routine monitoring by National Malaria Control Program, very important in the near future. Once again, thank you for your attention. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Quang. So if we can ask all of the presenters to put their camera on, we have another 5 minutes and we'll go through some of the questions. Apologies for running over time, but I hope everyone will agree it was a fascinating set of talks. Our top question is for Professor Dondorp. What would be the lowest parasitemia for testing artemisinin resistance?
Yeah, in fact, it's not only a question for me, also for Olivo, because the molecular analysis can be done from filter paper blood spots, only needs a few parasites. Even you can do it from RDTs, although the yield is around 50–60% of the RDT blood spots you can use for that. For the in vitro sensitivity testing, you need quite a few parasites. So around above 10,000 per microliter.
I don't have an answer off the top of my head. I mean, we're doing the genetic analysis from 2 quite small blood spots, 20 microliters, and I mean, very usually, even with the parasitemias we get in Vietnam, Laos, and so on, which are relatively low by global standards, we tend to be pretty successful at genotyping, probably approaching 90% of the sample. So it's not a huge problem as far as I can see.
Thank you. Our next question is, in the generation of ACT failure, does resistance always arise first to the ART drug and then to the partner drug, or can it also go the other way?
Yeah, that's one for me, I guess, unless someone else will take that one. It's not always the case. If there is already a lot of quite high level resistance to the partner drug, that will drive the ACT failure. And a good example is high-grade resistance to sulfadoxine pyrimethamine in some African countries like the DRC, parts of India. There you see those ACTs failing, whereas there's not artemisinin resistance present. But the examples I gave there, clearly artemisinin resistance was first, and partner drug resistance followed with mefloquine and piperacin.
Thank you. And an open question to anyone. What are the training programs available in Asia and Oceania to build capacity for drug efficacy surveillance at subnational level?
I can tell you that actually we're actively working on sort of building a series of online trainings that basically cover, well, I mean, they're primarily focused on genetic surveillance, but they will also cover the more general aspects of drug resistance and epidemiology. And I mean, at the moment, we are thinking of this for the partners of our projects. But in fact, there's no reason why we cannot open these to a wider audience. I'm not really aware of a lot of training programs that cover this area, which is all sort of pretty new, really. Maybe Arjen?
No, not for the genetic part, but for the other aspects, like how to do TES studies and so forth. Of course, the WHO, together with the national programs, organize their training for that.
Okay, unfortunately, we are out of time, even with our extra 15 minutes. There's a lot more questions. So I will share the questions with the speakers and we'll see if we can address some of them offline as well. The whole presentation will be recorded and will be posted on YouTube within hopefully a couple of hours. It just remains for me to thank all of the speakers and all of the attendees for joining, and we look forward to seeing you in future APMEN Talks sessions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
So there's a poll for you to complete. We'll pop up on the screen.
Richard, just, I'm very happy for you to share my contacts so that people can send me questions if they want to.
Thank you, Oliver.
Thank you.
Yeah, same for me.
Thank you, Professor Arjen. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you too. Thank you too for your talk.
Thank you. Very nice to see you, Quang and Dr. Keo.
Thank you so much.
Keo, bye-bye.